Marshall, welcome to the program. It's good to have you here.
Pleasure to be on, Kevin.
Hey, how did you give people a little bit of background about yourself, how you got involved in researching this stuff, and anything I might have left out? And let's go from there.
Well, sure. Let's use three words that are important to the conversation that'll help your listeners as well. The first word is perception, second word is awareness, third word is spot. And just to give an example, we know that there are 100-year events. And when a 100-year event happens, all you can say is that was the day it happened. Fair enough. Always been, always will be. So that's a given. But now what I want you to do, Kevin, is in the span of your own lifetime memories, beginning with your first, all the way to the present. Have you noticed a change in the frequency of the events?
So, I mean, how quickly they're happening? Yeah.
And so this is what people are seeing. And when they come to the topic of Planet X, it's because they've seen something, and that's called perception. And perception is an important word. That's what the elites use. Then there's awareness. So now let me ask you, you've seen this increase in this. What is the meaning of it?
Yeah. You know, I do things like go on YouTube and do searches like Nibiru or ISON, today or this week, and there's all the videos that come up, and I just kind of will go, oh, mamma mia, I can't believe how much stuff is up there and how much just flooding into YouTube. And you look at some of the stuff people are claiming it's 2 stars, this and that, and I'm like, hey, dummy, just look, it's an obvious reflection off the window. You're shooting through glass. So, I mean, and you get stuff that innocuous, that harmless, the stuff where I look at it and go, I really don't know.
So you haven't been able to find, see, this is for me, it started with perception back in the 90s. So I had a travel business to Russia, and I was flying back and forth every year, December, January. Always took the same route on Aeroflot, which went over the poles from San Francisco to Moscow. And so over the course of several years of traveling outbound in December, which was at night, and always in the return, I was always flying over the poles in January. And over the course of those years, of a span of about 8 years, what I saw the very first time was beautiful, unbroken. It was amazing. First time I saw blue snow, or blue ice, which is very old ice. And because I grew up in the deserts of Arizona, where snow was something you got at 7-Eleven in a cup with some syrup on it. And, that's just what it was. So I was mesmerized. But I watched over the years as the pole slowly and continually deteriorated. In my last trip, which was in 98, and I returned in 99, and what I saw was... I saw the North Pole basically like a busted windshield of a car in a wrecking yard. And this was a consistent standard, this was, you didn't have hills and valleys, highs and lows, good and bad and whatever. It was a steady deterioration, starting from the first time I saw it in 1993, January of 93, all the way to January of 99. And that was perception. I had seen this over the years, but it wasn't until the last time and I saw it and it was so fractured. I mean, it looked anemic, it looked sick, it was just awful for January. And that was when, you get to the meaning of all of this and you go, okay, what am I really looking at? Because I sure don't believe what the corporate spin meisters for the oil and energy companies are telling me.
Right.
And so there's something going on. That's awareness. When you see things happening, people perceive all of the time. They see these news accounts of meteors. They see all of these things that are happening. But they hold themselves in check. They don't want to go to that next step of awareness, because awareness is where you really have to say, okay, what is the meaning of all of this? And you start coming to grips with that. Then the third step is what I call a spot, a single point of truth. And a single point of truth, that's what we started looking for. And simply put, imagine a picture puzzle, and you find that corner piece. And from the corner piece, you can build out the rest of the puzzle. And conversely, every other piece of the puzzle tracks back to that same corner piece. All right, that's a single point of truth. It is that one thing that connects everything else. And I got together with a couple of other folks, and we started looking for this spot. We wanted to find the single point of truth on what was happening to our planet. And is it truly anthropomorphic, man-made? And what we determined when we published our findings in 2000, and we were ridiculed and mocked, which kind of made us feel like we had joined the club, and we found that it was principally solar-driven, and that anthropomorphic man-made causes are exacerbating it, turbocharging the effect, if you will. So we're doing quite a bit so we can... Yeah.
Well, one thing that I've come across is that when Mount Pinatubo exploded a decade or two back, they said that it put more chlorofluorocarbons into the atmosphere than the entire time that man has been on the planet that we know of. It just shot all this stuff up into the air. So, I think the planet itself and the sun is going to contribute far more than human beings running their SUVs,
That's right. I mean, one good volcano fart, and, that tops us. So, but on the other hand, we do a lot of other things that are very destructive of the environment as well. And we're doing a very good job of killing the oceans, and we're, gutting out the Amazon and doing all kinds of things that are overall weakening the biosphere. And so consequently, we have a planet that doesn't give us as much protection as it used to. And this is important because Earth's magnetic field is diminished. The sun is acting very peculiar now. There's a lot of things, all of the planets in the solar system are being affected by the approach of this oncoming mini-constellation. And we talk about this in our video, Planet X System Observations and Orbital Path Analysis. And we actually use imagery that we have acquired and vetted, and we show the exact process. Although it never fails to amaze me that people go to debunk it without ever watching the video. It's like then people are asking me, and I go, hey, did you look at the video at what we... Oh, yeah, you did answer that. Golly gee, who'd have thunk about that? You actually anticipated it. And
it's kind of like trying to set up the VCR, you pull your hair out, and then you actually sit down and read the instructions.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the standard joke for many years back when we all had VCR machines was, how many of you out there have a flashing time?
Yeah. 12,
as in it's never been set.
Well, continue, please.
So we really got onto the issue. The single point of truth for us was solar activity. And the sun was behaving unusually. And it was a very small, very minor increase in the amount of energy the sun was putting out. And also in 2006 with the Ulysses probe flyby, which we talk about in that video, in my subsequent video, Planet X 101. And for those your listeners out there, my website is yowusa.com, and if you, my last video that I put up, Planet X 101, who, what, where, when, why, and how. And what I do provide there for newbies that's really valuable is I take you from soup to nuts. We start with when did this actually really crank up in the 1700s in Europe, all the way through to the present. And what I do is I show you all of the people who have been following and trying to find this object over the centuries. And it first started in Europe, and then the search came to America. Percival Lowell really is the American, in terms of the American effort to find Planet X, Percival Lowell has to get credit for that.
Well, let me stop you for 1 second, and let's just ask the question. Before we know what Percival Lowe was looking for, what is Planet X? What is it these people were actually looking for?
Well, what they were looking for was something that was a gravitational perturber, something that would pull another planet, tug it, give it a little zigzag, if you will, in its orbit, a perturbation. Okay. So the first thing that they were looking for, Uranus was the first planet that was discovered with a telescope. However, Neptune was the first planet discovered with mathematics. Because they observed the perturbations of Uranus, and then they were able to mathematically calculate the location of Neptune. And literally, within just a few days after the coordinates were determined mathematically, Neptune was discovered very quickly. There it is. And then again, Neptune had perturbations, and they were looking for Neptune's perturber, and that's what Percival Lowell was looking for, was Neptune's perturber. And they thought when Tombaugh found Pluto that Pluto was the case. However, it wasn't until they were able to find that Pluto has a couple of moons, and particularly with the moon Charon, that they were able to determine that Pluto doesn't have the mass to be a perturber. It's only about 60% of the size of our own moon. So the search kept going on, but they were looking for something that was exerting this effect, but they didn't know exactly what it was. And so Planet X has always been this unknown thing that is a gravitational force out there somewhere. And it could be a comet, it could be a planet, it could be any number of things. What we have determined is that Planet X is actually a system with a brown dwarf, sun at the center, which is a binary twin to our own sun, Sol. Now, is it common for a solar system to have multiple suns? 90% of the solar systems in our galaxy have multiple suns. Mm-hmm. And just as many suns there are rogue planets as well, floating around, in deep space in between everything. And the thing here is that this brown dwarf is not the size of our sun. It's not that much larger than Jupiter, actually. And if Jupiter were a little larger, it would have enough mass, perhaps, to turn into a brown dwarf. And what happens with a brown dwarf is that it can ignite, but after it ignites, it doesn't have sufficient mass to maintain a nuclear furnace like our sun does. And so it's like a hot coal in a barbecue pit that just takes forever just to burn off. You bank it off to the side, and just finally, releases its heat. Now, on a cosmic scale, this takes a very long time. Right. And the hallmark of a brown dwarf is that it is going to be surrounded by the exhaust of its detonation, this cloud of iron dust. And so that's what gives this object, it's called a winged object in ancient history, because it's dragging all of this iron dust with it and actually pushing it in front and pulling it behind. And I believe that during the 10 plagues of Exodus, this is what caused all of the water to turn blood red. Because go to a brickyard. You okay there?
Oh, I'm fine. Go ahead.
Okay. Go to a brickyard and ask them how you make those beautiful red bricks. They'll just say, we take our standard mixture and throw iron in it. It's iron is what gives it that red color.
Right.
So, what we have here is a brown dwarf with several planets and moons in orbit around it, and it is it's in a long trajectory. Takes it close to our sun and then back out again. It's in an inclined orbit, which means it's unstable. Back in 2008. There were a couple of disclosure videos on the South Pole Telescope, and we were the ones that broke the story in 2006 on the SPT, which is a low infrared telescope this is ideal for looking for an object like this, because this is not a visible object. It is so occluded, it is surrounded by so much dust that, you're not going to see it in visible light spectrum, which is a very narrow band. You're not going to see it in visible light until it's much closer to the sun. And at that point, then, boy, we're going to see it. But for now, it's rising up. It's in a shallow ascent somewhere near the ecliptic, which we determined. And we've imaged from a Vulcan feed in Turrialba, one of its outermost orbitals. And we had a gentleman by the name of Jorge Arena who was flying to South America, and he got an image of the brown dwarf itself, which was really, we just said, hey, this is the first visible light sighting that's really been reported. And it's difficult to see the object because of its angle of approach, and also it's behind the sun, and we're in a mutual corkscrew around the sun, our orbit and its orbit. And it's not a perfect corkscrew. We are closing on it. And a group called the 00 Skyview, and this is a group of amateur astronomers with some rather good telescopes and their own infrared equipment, have determined that when this flyby goes into its most dangerous phase, that we're both going to, this mini constellation is going to be on the same side of the sun as us. Now, it's not going to hit us. All right. Anybody says it's going to hit us is selling you a bridge. But what will, is we're going to have, first off, the iron oxide. That's going to come in along with a whole lot of junk. So you're going to have impact events. The surface waters are just going to become horrible. So potable water is really going to become a scarce resource. That's one of the reasons why I always advise to people, when you're trying to find a place to bug out to, 3 things you want to look for: soft earth, rolling hills, and deep artesian water. You want to get down there where the water is being filtered by good old Mother Earth.
Right.
And so this thing's coming around, and due to its orbit, due to the number of different factors, it's incredibly difficult to see it. It doesn't pop up, time after time after time, as people would assume. It's like, well, it's got to be there. You got to be able to go out and stand and look at it. No, that's not the case. And this is something where you need to have some elevation. You need to be looking at the right time of day, which is before sunset or before sunrise, because you're looking for objects that are going to be close to the sun, and which is the case with the objects that we have shown in our videos. So when is this all going to play out? It's going to take, from what we can gather, and this is what we put in our Planet X system and orbital path analysis, that we have basically a crude working orbital analysis. And at a bare bones minimum, the whole flyby event, from first grumble to last grumble, if you will, if it's dumb luck and the universe throws us a bone, 3 years from this point, but it could take a decade. I mean, this is something that there's really, plotting exactly where it is. Obviously we have amateur astronomers. They have put up their coordinates, and folks could go out and look at it themselves if they had the right equipment. And so, I get letters all the time from people, and they're going, well, I'll go to Costco and buy a telescope. And no, that's not going to work. You need to be taking something a little more serious approach than a $200 Celestron. And so, at least at this point, later on, then it'll be a different thing. But if we look at what's happening with our planet, we look what's happening with the sun right now, we're in a solar maximum that simply hasn't made sense from day one. I can remember back.
Is that because of the lack of sunspot activity?
Oh man, just in every way imaginable. Not only lack of sunspot activity, now we're getting sunspots again, but the solar winds and the intensity of the solar flares. The intensity's not there in terms of the activity that we have now. It's still, even with all of these X flares that we've been having in the last week and a half or so, it's still a mild solar maximum. But it's also something where the sun normally, its poles reverse, and its North Pole and South Pole reverse, and right now it's not reversing. The poles are not aligned correctly, and this is something that, what the forecasters are saying, well, this will resolve in time, and then, both of the poles will be polarized. But the point here is that our sun is just not, it's really behaving abnormally. And a new concern based on all of this is that we could be going into a mini ice age, that the normal activity of the sun is not there. So absent that activity, we're going to have more bizarre weather patterns. And
now, the irony
there,
shouldn't be lost on, I hope isn't lost on too many people, because all we hear about is global warming, and if we're actually going into an ice age, they're preparing for the wrong calamity.
Well, we don't know. See, that, the whole thing is that, and if you look at the subject of global warming, well, going back to Al Gore's movie, An Inconvenient Truth, which I call an inconvenient omission. And, he blames it entirely on anthropomorphic, which is a great way to go out and sell Kyoto and, tax credit systems for carbon.
Control people. Yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, it really is kind of like, comes across more to me like a scam, because what he's not addressing is all of the earth changes. What's happening? We have, massive number of bizarre fish kills. We have seabeds rising, volcanism, seismicity. There's just, a week doesn't go by that a couple of volcanoes are popping off. And what are they saying? This volcano hasn't been active in 100 years. And so you have volcanoes that have been dormant for 100 years all over the place, particularly over in Kamchatka and places like that. And these things are waking up. And what do you know? But look what happened. We had that big earthquake in Pakistan. 3 islands rise up out of the sea. So the thing is that people see this stuff. It doesn't get that much coverage on the network, particularly cable networks. They're more tuned into tabloid TV and all of the money that's to be made with scandals and whatnot to sell credit card services and tampons, for advertisers.
Yes.
So that's where they're at. They're really not, for the network channels, hard news is more of a filler now and a special, whereas the rest of it's just, talking head commentary and scandals, and unfortunately dead white female stories. So we're not getting that. So people are seeing drips and drabs, bits and pieces of these things. But the thing that you can say about catastrophes is that when it comes to catastrophes, there's no difference between them and politics, because all politics is local. Same thing with catastrophes. If somebody's volcano explodes, if thousands of people are killed in a typhoon, and it didn't happen where you're at, hey, blue skies forever. What am I looking at? So people will just. It's interesting, the elites call us eaters, and you have to give them their due on that one, because we behave pretty much like cows in a pasture. If there's something that annoys us, we just move enough away from it so that we feel that we're a little bit of a comfortable distance, and we go back to eating, mulching. And that's what the public does, is that it'll just move away from that enough to feel it has some distance and go back to, Dancing with the Stars.
Exactly.
But for people who are in awareness and, who are looking for a single point of truth, this is stuff that they're going, whoa, what in the heck is happening here? Another good example of it, and what really concerns me a lot, particularly, is this convergence of natural and man-made or industrial accidents. Fukushima being a case in point. In 6 years, Fukushima is going to have, the whole Pacific Basin is going to be irradiated in about 5 to 6 years.
Yeah. And nobody's talking about it. They're just talking about everything else. And there was a statement that came out from David Suzuki, I think it was, and he was saying that, it's possible that in the next 3 years there could be another major earthquake in that region. And if that does happen, wave bye-bye to Japan, and he's saying that you'd have to evacuate the entire west coast of the United States.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
he's absolutely right.
We're talking about how it's racist to say that there's, you have a brown paper bag. We're talking about all this nonsense, but we're not talking about things that really are going to affect many people's lives on separate continents. We're not going to worry about any of that. We're just going to brush that under the rug and just go on like, there's nothing wrong.
Well, Janet Napolitano said we're going to have a major EMP attack, and we're going to have a major natural disaster, the likes of which no one has ever seen before. And an EMP attack, would be something very easy to carry off. I mean, you put a couple of jihadis in a Cessna 172 with an EMP bomb, and they go fly over Los Angeles and say their goodbyes to this world and push the button, and next thing you know, that's it.
You're back in the 1700s.
A vast region goes black.
Yeah, you're in the 1700s, just like that.
That's right. And so it could happen that fast, and, the big reason why there's such a lid on this information is its Titanic rules. First class gets the boat, steerage goes down with the ship. We're steerage. So the elites have already decided who they want to survive this global cataclysm. And they've already, they've got everything. They're ready. They're ready to go now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and they're already working ahead on the next 1,000 years. We're sitting here, and people are going, "Well, what's this Planet X thing?"
Yeah, and they're looking
paycheck.
They're looking, to the next couple of days. The so-called elites, as you said, they're looking out to the next 1,000 years. I do have some questions that got sent over to me from the chat, some of the chat rooms.
Sure.
The first is this: what about the predictors of sea rise along the coastal areas? Are they accurate?
Yeah,
they are.
We're going to see coastal areas are going to get hammered. If you live in a coastal area, it's not going to go well for you. And you're going to have a lot of different things that you have to deal with. Just first off, just on what is happening on the planet right now. Let's take away space threats. Because obviously you have an impact event, boom. If that hits in one of the ocean basins, that's going to send a massive wall of water that's going to tear you up. If La Palma erupts and the western flank of La Cumbre de Vija, the younger, smaller volcano on the south end of that island in the archipelago, its western flank was separated in an event that happened shortly after World War II. So It's primed for collapse, and if that western flank of that volcano collapses, the east coast of the United States, from Maine to Florida, is a bone to be chewed. It's toast.
Well, I've heard I've heard if La Palma slides into the ocean, I've heard reports that they think that there could be a tsunami wave hitting, like you said, up and down the entire East Coast, I guess moving at the speed of a jet aircraft and several hundred feet tall.
Yep, and that is, it could literally be, depending on topology, it could reach as far as 40 miles inland. So you're talking about something that is that would have a very devastating effect. Now, on the Pacific side, there's other threats as well. You know, if we have an impact event, something that hits and it doesn't airburst, you have a meteor that becomes an asteroid that instead of airbursting above the water, actually slams into it, goes through the water column and smacks into the seabed, that's going to set off a similar kind of wall of water that's going to hit the entire West Coast and, again, from Washington all the way down. So there are these concerns, and it's difficult for people who are going, well, the sky is blue. What's the problem? But the sky can turn a different color, and things can happen, and it can happen suddenly and come out of the blue. And life has changed. You look at, I find it's really interesting that you could go and I was watching an old Steven Spielberg's movie, Artificial Intelligence. Mm-hmm. And, there's the aliens, and they're flying in, and Earth has gone into another ice age. And the World Trade Tower is there, hanging up above the ice.
Wow.
Or you look at the movie Deep Impact, and Deep Impact is showing, the Twin Towers and those getting hammered. So what happens? 9/11 happens, boom, in a blink of an eye. Mm-hmm. The world changes. And, think back to that time in December 21, back on 9/11. Think back to 9/10. And what were we doing? What were we interested in? What was in the media? Everyone was, the country was in a different mood. It was in a different tenor. And then after 9/11, we went into a war footing, and we got dragged into these debacles in the Middle East.
These phony wars that are destroying the country and destroying the world as we know it. So, what's interesting though, you bring up the day before 9/11. What's interesting that happened that day on September 10th is Donald Rumsfeld comes waddling out, goes up to the podium, and says, "Shazam! We're missing like $2 trillion from the Pentagon. We don't know where it is." And then we know what happened the next day, and there's not another word about it.
Absolutely. So
isn't that wonderful?
The manipulations are happening, and people are being. There's a lot of suppression now. Do I feel sorry for people who are completely oblivious to all of this? No, not anymore. Because to me, December 21, 2012 was, it was a hyped media event in part.
Oh, yeah.
But for me, what was really important, it was a line in the sand. Everybody, by the time that day rolled around, everybody knew what the significance of that day was, which was stop, look, think, listen, examine the world about you, come into awareness. And what did 99.99% of the people do? Change the channel. Mm-hmm. All right? And so they moved on. So at this point, it's really the folks that are really still following this, have a genuine interest, are people that have had a profound life experience that has ripped the blinders off their head. And I mean, when those blinders come off, it's not a pleasant experience. It's like being slapped in the face with a dead salmon. You just stand there, spit scales going, what the hell was that?
Yeah, I call it the rude awakening. You realize, oh my God, this is nothing. That I've just looked at the world for what it really is, and oh my God. And once you get that moment, it's like the guy in the Matrix who wanted to go back into the Matrix, and he's saying, I know the stakes aren't real, I know the women aren't real, but just wipe my memory, put me back in. I want to go back because this reality of the world, this sucks. I don't want anything to do with this. And unfortunately, we can't wipe our minds. We can't go back into a matrix. We know what the story is. We have a lot of people, I think, that are basically awake, but they don't like the reality, and they're trying their best to just kind of get through life and kind of fake their way through it because they know how bad it is, but they don't want to deal with it. And so it's almost like the alcoholic that's in denial. I'm not an alcoholic. I don't drink enough, or I only drink on the weekends, or I only drink when I'm hanging out with my friends. We don't talk about the fact that he's drinking 3 bottles of vodka, but
and that's just for breakfast.
And that's just for breakfast. But this is the same pattern of behavior is happening. But while we got the time, I also want to get into Comet ISON, and I get into YouTube. I do some searches, like I said, ISON, today, ISON, this week, and I bring up the videos and I go, oh, mamma mia, oh my God, there's so much there. I know that not all of it can be true. A lot of the stuff conflicts, and you got people saying the most outrageous stuff that I know is total BS. What have you found to be the case?
Sometimes a comet can just be a comet. To me, what I see with ISON is the same kind of stampede we saw with Comet Elenin. And there's a lot of speculation, wild-eyed speculation. Even on space.com, now they're even talking about, they're saying Comet ISON is Nibiru. No, it's not Nibiru. It's not. Yeah. It could be. Now this ISON could be a parallel object that is. There could be something where there's some sort of coincidental relationship with it. But from the beginning with ISON, we just were really suspicious of this being nothing more than another stampede. That you're going to have a comet that's going to brighten up, and they're going to go, it's blue. Well, Comet Holmes did that, and it was for a lot of people believe that Comet Holmes was the blue Kachina of Hopi prophecy. Although the red Kachina, which is the one that does the real damage, didn't follow on. Now, I have to say, maybe Comet ISON comes in and it really fires up real bright, like NASA said, so that it becomes brighter than our own moon. It becomes a real stellar object out there. On the other hand, it could just fizzle, and we don't know. We don't know if it's going to drag anything. If there's there's comets have different kinds of tails. The two that we're interested in are the gas tail and the dust tail. The gas tail is the solar wind coming off of the sun that's going to just blow it straight away from the sun. But then you have the dust tail that tracks with the object. It's going to be preceding and following in the same orbital path. And this is just junk and debris that's coming along with the comet. And that you have to be concerned with, because we could very well see some of that come through and cause a problem where it starts taking down spacecraft. And I will tell you that Comet Elenin, that was a concern for NASA with Comet Elenin, because they were floating the trial story of an emergency evacuation of the International Space Station around the time that we would be passing through the comet's tail. So that was a justifiable. And the comet, it did pop off. It did trigger a solar flare. And that could have been a problem for us to some degree, except we happen to be most fortunate that the moon was directly between us and the event. So the dark side of the moon caught hell on that one, and we didn't have any real problems with it. So we did forecast something like that, and it did happen on a mild scale, and it was fortunate that the moon was where it was at. But still the same, Comet Elenin just turned out to be overhyped, where it was an alien mothership, it was Nibiru,
oh yeah,
it was that, it was drag it up. And the reason why this stuff gets pumped up so artificially this way is that it's just a way of grabbing people's attention, people who are perceptive but struggling with awareness. You get them and you hook them by the nose, drag them into a rabbit hole, and then just you plunge them into one rabbit hole after another, and they get tired of looking at dark dirt. And at that point, you just throw up your hands and go, well, forget about it. It's nonsense. I'll never get to the bottom of this, and you walk away because you've been manipulated into going into all these rabbit holes. Right. That's what the purpose of a stampede is. And these stampedes they don't happen organically. Let's make a real point of this, because we've been observing several different comets over the years. My very first story that put me on the map in 1999 with the Millennium Group was on Comet Lee. And there weren't, we didn't have all this wild-eyed speculation about Comet Lee. People were interested, could it be the, Nostradamus King of Terror comet that was predicted. But that was the only thing of interest on Comet Lee. Now, when these comets come, what happens is that the elite disinformationists grab every wild-eyed theory that they can grab their hands on, and they start pumping it out there, pumping it out in videos, and they become pretty good with it. And they get the interest going, and then you get folks that are going to get it, and they're going to start mimicking it. They don't do original work on their own. They'll go, I'll grab a snippet of this and a snippet of that, cobbled it together, and my contribution is that I've just simply put more of the confusion into one place. Convenience. Thank you. Instead of doing original work and going, well, what is the meaning of all of this? So right now, ISON is really where there's just this cattle stampede. And, on my site, yowusa.com, you're not going to see ISON stories. We're just not covering it. I covered Comet Elenin because so many people were panicked and really hysterical with it.
Yeah, I got a kick out of it. I really did, because I remember seeing the images that, I forget what satellite it was from, when Elenin was out near the orbit of Mercury, and they're showing you right there, that bright object, that's Mercury. You see Elenin coming in, and it explodes. This huge, massive explosion. And then
it was really impressive.
It was impressive, right? But then you still had people, you go in, you do the little trick, Elenin today. People claiming that Elenin is still on its way and it's going to destroy us. And I'm like, wait a minute. Didn't you see the video you saw where the whole damn thing just blew up into a million pieces? How is it going to hurt anybody? And it's right. It's that George Orwell doublethink, holding two contradictory thoughts in the mind at the same time, and neither one cancels the other out. And this is what I see going on. It just makes me nuts. And then the other question to ask that I don't hear anybody asking with any of this stuff is it's a very simple question. Who profits? Who profits by putting all of this, all this bullshit out? Who profits from the confusion? Who profits by having people think all this gobbledygook and start pushing this out? Because as you just said, they only need to do a little bit of work. Let's say I want to put out some kind of propaganda about this. I need to only put out this little bit. And then I get weak-minded people that go, and as you said, I grab this, I like that. They don't vet anything. They don't do any research. They don't get it to a point where they make it their own. I mean, I'll give you the case of 9/11. I researched 9/11 for a good 2.5 years, and I was the first cable access TV producer here in my area that stuck my neck out on the air and said, folks, that was a fraud. What you saw was a fraud. I don't use the term inside job. It was just a fraud to manipulate you into everything that's been going on now. Everything you see going on now is a fraud. It's based on a fraud. And you know what? I wanted to be able to get to a point where when I came out and said that, if I got attacked publicly, I wanted to be able to defend my position. But what we see nowadays is nobody can defend their position because they don't know what damn thing they're talking about to begin with. And that just irritates me to no end. And somebody is profiting from all that mass hysteria and confusion.
Well, it's not profiting, okay? This is a control issue. It's not a profit issue. The whole point here is that, look, as it stands, the Earth does not have the resources to sustain the population we have already.
Yeah.
And it's only getting tighter, and particularly with crop failures happening, it's only going to get worse. Grocery store prices are going to keep ratcheting up, and we'll start seeing different kinds of shortages. And this is going on. This is really about, you have a ruling elite, a small number of people. 1% of less than 1% of the population controls 46% of the wealth on the planet.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So what you have is a situation where this small minority ruling elite, they're not, preservation of the species for them is about preservation of themselves and their minions.
Right.
Whoever they choose. We are eaters. We
right.
are
Useless
not
eaters.
Human beings. We
right.
are eaters. We are uber class.
Yeah.
This is euthanasia, all right, where you want to reduce populations. Now, if you were to start warning everybody living along coastal areas of what's really going on, people are going to start moving away from the coasts. Well, property values are going to decline. It's going to cause problems and disruptions for the elites. Their money funding mechanisms are going to get clobbered. They want to keep them in place. Now, the fact is that 60% of the world's population is within 40 miles of an ocean or a large body of water. And if nobody's really prepared for what happens, then when, as Mother Shipton said, Gabriel, sounds his horn and the seas are going to go nuts, we're going to have a massive, massive dieback event very quickly. And a huge, huge percentage of the global population is going to perish. If you look at the Georgia Guidestones, the Georgia Guidestones is a monument erected, I think about 30, 40 years ago in Georgia, and it's in 8 different languages, 10 commandments for the world after this world. And the first one is keep the population of the planet under 500 million. It doesn't say how we get there. Okay?
Exactly.
But what that's really saying is you're looking at huge, massive death and die-off, because you're going to have the people in the coastal areas that are going to get hammered. And for the people in the coastal areas, there's even more concern now. Like, for example, when I would talk to people that were living in New Jersey, New York, along the eastern seaboard, up in that area, and they'd say, what should I do? And I used to say, well, just head to western New York, get into Pennsylvania. Not with all these fracking fields all over the place, because the fracking fields are going to just turn entire massive state-sized tracts of land into death zones, because these fracking wells have casings to keep the well from polluting, the aquifer. Well,
right.
The fact is 5% of well casings fail on the very first day, 5%. And all well casings in the best of conditions will fail within 30 years.
Okay.
Most in the first 15 years. And those failures are where you're going to start seeing, people opening their faucets and, putting a Bic lighter to it, and it's a Roman candle. Well, The thing here is we have, let's say, for example, the New Madrid pops off. Well, that could be enough to fracture wells all over the place. That's going to go into water systems, aquifers, rivers, streams. And so people who are going to be fleeing from the coastal areas, thinking that they're going to find safety in Pennsylvania, are going to go in and they'll be drinking the water because they'll get thirsty, and they're going to, and all of this foulness that's coming up from the ground, they're going to have to contend with that. And so there's this convergence of the natural and man-made disasters. There's a lot that people have to be concerned about. But here's the important thing, is it's not how much you have in your bunker. Because the simple fact is that everyone is, they're stockpiling from anywhere from 3 months to a year typically. This is a multi-year. This could be a decade-long event, which means everything you're putting in your bunker is not a solution, it's a buffer. All it's going to do is buy you enough time to figure out a more sustainable solution with like-minded others in a self-organized community. That's all that's going to buy you is some time. It's not going to buy you a guarantee of survival. And the same thing for all these people that have these deep that are building these bunkers and $500,000, $1 million bunkers. They're stockpiling a year to maybe 2 years of food. But again, when they come up, what are they going to find? What, they're going to go, that's it, sit out the end of days, and then come up 2 years later and just drive to Walmart and restock? I don't think so.
Yeah, exactly.
So, the point here is for people to be thinking and to find, the important thing for me, the big focus now, is knowledge. It's the reason why on my website there's a system I worked with Master Roar Shepherd called Donjon Breathing. It comes out of Korea. It's thousands of years old, and it's a survival system. It grew out of a need of Korean elites to find some way to not only deal with the aches and complaints of life and keep their energy up and feel light and bright, but these were people who were terrified of catching a common cold. Hence the old expression, catch your death of cold, because communicable diseases are going to be a massive killer. And Donjon breathing gets your oxygen level up to 107%. So when you're oxygenating like that, then what happens is your immune system is going to be much stronger. You're going to be able to resist these bugs more effectively. And so I'm really trying to present this knowledge as a long-term tool that people can, once they learn how to do it, they're immediately going to feel tremendous benefits if they do it now. But in the long term, what the Donjon breathing does is that, first off, it's incredibly effective, and the results are very fast. You do it, you're going to feel positive results the very first time you do it. You don't have to do it for 2 or 3 months before something starts.
Listen, we got very little time left. Why don't you let people know how they can get in touch with you through the website, any videos that you've produced that they can see, etc. Before we go off the air, we got about 2 minutes.
Okay. For all the videos, for all of the information, just go to yowusa.com or go to marshallmasters.com, and I've pointed that domain to my website. So you could just go for marshallmasters.com or yowusa.com. The video that, if you're new to this topic, you definitely want to see it, is Planet X 101, who, what, why, where, when, and how. That's going to be real important. In 1 hour, you're going to do the equivalent of 6 months of personal research, night in, night after night.
Yeah.
And then the next thing is just start preparing. take a look at this, feel better on your own system, but also think about knowledge that you can get. Go to a flea market and find old books on farming and gardening and herbal remedies and things like this. Stockpile this information. Go on the internet. See who's selling really good books about this. Stockpile. Knowledge is just as important as beans, more important than the beans.
And on that, I thank you so much for being on the program. We got about 10 seconds to go. Marshall Masters, thank you so much for being on the show. We'll get you back on again. We'll talk some more. It's been fascinating, and I hope everybody's enjoyed the show tonight. We had the first hour with Jim Morris.